mysterious. Hey everybody, welcome back. Got a good one for you today. Hit that subscribe button for me if you would real quick. Post in the comments where you're watching from. And let's get into today's Bigfoot encounter. This one comes to us from Lance out of West Virginia. I have a number of favorite haunts, if you will, that I like to get away to and do a little fishing. Most of which I access by using my quad, having trailered it near to where I'm going. I like seclusion, and in my life, this is how I achieve it whenever I have some downtime. All I can say is that it works for me, and as the saying goes, different strokes for different folks. On August 12th, 2014, I had worked in as close as I could to get to my destination, which was the area of Charles Creek, Cranberry River, and the Cranberry Glades. This is a pristine wilderness location, and there are quite a few nice fish in here for the taking. It was 8 o'clock in the morning when I started to fish, working my way up the bank of Charles Creek and walking northward to the glades. I should tell you that there is no shortage of wildlife in here, including deer, black bear, and every kind of ground critter you can imagine. I say this because as you settle into the stillness of the surrounds, the forest gradually comes alive around you. When I'm fishing in here, it's not uncommon to hear the snap of a twig or crunching the leaves. My eyes are always moving in response to whatever I hear, but my main focus is on the water's surface. I was getting into some real fine fish. Approaching the fork by Cranberry Glades when I heard a little grunt across the creek. I say this because at that moment, my mind said there was a black bear foraging around. Typically, a bear doesn't want anything to do with humans, and they'll move off quickly once they're aware of you or have caught your scent. On this day, I was downwind from this critter. If it was a bear, it wouldn't have gotten wind of me from where I was positioned. I was also in a spot that I couldn't see it, so it couldn't see me either. I kept fishing, being mindful of what I'd heard. After about another 15 minutes or so, I started to hear some movement upstream from me, maybe about 50 yards away, along the opposite bank of the creek. There was what I'll describe as a barrier that was formed by some dense brush and bramble bushes. Within this wall, which was backed by many much larger trees, there were occasionally small tunnels that were formed simply by the growth pattern of the bushes. Think of them as being small windows where you could see into the brush for maybe a couple feet or so. From my perspective, everything looked very uniform as I was gazing across the creek in response to the grunts which I'd heard, with the exception of one small dark patch within the bramble. The only way I could explain this is to say that the coloration of everything in front of me and beyond had certain shades and hues. These colors were unbroken as far as the foliage was concerned, and yet here was this singular, very dark patch plugged into the brambles some 75 feet or so away from me. For whatever reason, my eyes couldn't shake looking at this dark area. The more I looked at it, the more I started to see what I believed was a face. And yet, there was absolutely no movement whatsoever. I'm sure you've heard of people saying that they saw the face of Jesus when frying an egg in a pan, or something like that. Or they saw a face in the mirror and thought it was a ghost, only to find out that the back of the mirror was peeling or the angle of the reflection made it seem as such. This was exactly what I was seeing and believing. In my mind, I was looking at a large black or dark brown face with big black eyes and a grin of white teeth. To make things even more interesting, the face which I believed I was looking at was only maybe 2 feet from the ground. So this was either a very short creature with an enormous head, or it was lying on the ground peering at me through the bushes. This visage had completely consumed my attention. At some point, I felt that I had actually locked eyes with a living being, and a cold chill permeated my very being. I mean that I actually shook violently from head to toe for a few seconds. All I can say is that in a moment's time I went from feeling total bliss and tranquility to being in a state of absolute fear and dread. Now, just behind where I believed I was seeing this black face, there was a very large old tree that was of substantial diameter. It had fallen and was leaning against a couple other trees. This fallen tree was perhaps 2 feet in diameter and was leaning completely across and behind the bushes where the face was, beginning from the ground level and angling upward maybe 12 feet, to where it met the other trees and had come to rest. I can't say why I didn't back out of there after this cold chill had consumed me, but I continued to creep ever closer to what I was looking at. I was convinced that I was looking eye to eye with a living creature, but I hadn't seen so much as a twitch or a blink of what I believed were a pair of eyes. I was now within about 40 feet of this thing when I realized that I was now seeing hair and wrinkles. I almost lost my breath at this realization. It was like a sudden shockwave that froze me in my tracks with a sensation that I would describe as dread or doom. I know that these are strange words, but in that moment, I felt I had crossed a line to where I was now in fear of death. That's the only way which I can describe it to you. It was at that very moment that a gigantic beast launched upward and had now revealed itself fully. Standing only 40 feet away from me or so, it let out a deep and foreboding growl. And I don't know how I stayed on my feet at that moment at the sight of this beast. I was standing across a shallow creek, 40 feet or so away from this enormous growling Bigfoot. It didn't stand up gradually, but rather leapt out of the brush in an instant to a standing position. As I stood there trembling, the beast started to contort its head, rolling around in a circular motion like it was trying to loosen up as a weightlifter would at a gym. No sooner had it finished doing this movement than did it force its upper body forward, flexed its arms, and let out a loud, deep, prolonged growl. I could feel the sound waves passing through me across the creek. When the growl ended, it let out a snort, turned, and leapt over the downed tree, disappearing into the woods. Of course, I now had affirmation that I was looking at a living being the entire time. The Bigfoot had to have been laying there on its belly, watching me the whole time through the bushes. I don't know what it was thinking of doing. Perhaps it was just inquisitive of my own presence. The thought had occurred to me after the fact that it may have been pissed off at me for staring at it such a long time and then moving a little too close for comfort. It reminded me very much of the rabbits which come in my yard to eat the weeds and grass. They'll stay perfectly still as though I don't see them until I'm almost on top of them before they jump. This is the same type of behavior that to me this Bigfoot was exhibiting until I had come a little too close and it felt its cover had been blown. When the creature had stood up, it had to have been at the very least 9 feet tall. And I could tell that it was a male for obvious reasons. The hair was dark brown. It was definitely hair, not fur like that of a black bear. I don't want to say that the body was sparsely covered, but there was definitely areas of the body where the skin could be seen, which appeared to be somewhat gray in coloration. It opened its mouth very wide when it growled, in the same fashion that I've seen a chimpanzee do. Having said that, I make no bones about it that this is not a gorilla, and it's definitely not a man. In fact, the only human attribute that this Bigfoot had, in my opinion, is that they stand on 2 legs and can walk. To me, they're an unknown species that stand alone unto themselves in nature. In the same way that a moose is not an elk, and an elk is not a deer, a Bigfoot is quite simply a Bigfoot and nothing else. The creature had a very broad nose which consumed a large section of the face. It had somewhat loose and scraggly hair above and below the mouth, as well as coming in from the sides of the cheeks. Its face was deeply furrowed with dark wrinkles in the skin. As it flexed its upper torso, it had its fists clenched, and they were the size of a small pumpkin. The body was overall very broad from waist to shoulders, and I would have to say it was somewhere between 4 and 5 feet in width. I can tell you right now, without any reservations whatsoever, that I could have died that day and would have never been found. The sheer strength and power exhibited by this beast was overwhelming in every sense of the word. With one swipe of its hand, I'm convinced it would have broken me into 2 pieces and ended my life, right then and there. Having had this experience for myself, I have no comprehension whatsoever how anybody could be left saying that these things are part human in any way, shape, or form. This, to me, would be like saying a moose was part human if they walked on 2 legs. This thing was an animal, and more aptly, a monster. I felt as though I had encountered the Wolfman or Frankenstein. I'll tell you and your listeners this as well. There was an overwhelming sense of evil coming out of this encounter. I have no idea how I escaped death, other than that my guardian angel was with me and scared the beast off. Well, that would be terrifying. Another good, fun story. What do y'all think of this one? Kind of disappointed he ended it right there, but I mean, I guess that's all there was to it. I just always want more. Well, hey, if you haven't already, I'd appreciate you smacking that subscribe button. And if you've had an encounter with a Bigfoot or any other cryptid or anything mysterious, you know I love hearing about it. Drop me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com, and I'll see y'all in the next one.